There exists a darker side to the unknown, where the truth is hidden, and the most disturbing enigmas linger. Such mysteries can leave us with a sense of unease and force us to confront the darkness. The Gulf Breeze 6 may sound like the name of a nefarious gang or biker club, but it was actually the name given to yet another chilling UFO incident that took place in Gulf Breeze, Florida, back in the late 1980s. According to the documents, 6 Florida dwellers claimed to have seen a series of unidentified flying objects. One such craft had been a triangular shape. The mystery of whether these were genuine encounters, hoaxes, or even the misidentifications of other aircraft still lingers, adding to the intrigue of the incident. While some maintain that either one of these theories could be correct, none of the official investigations were able to produce clear-cut answers. Gulf Breeze is a hotspot for alien spacecraft sightings, earning itself a dot on the map for places with the most UFO encounters, and possibly being added to the list of places aliens should visit. Nearby this area are 5 military bases, meaning the skies are regularly filled with bright flashes and twinkling lights. While sightings are common here for this reason, these particular incidents were far more ominous than the "it's just a plane" conclusion. One individual right in the center of it all was a contractor named Ed Walters, who would later write a book about his experience. He explained that the incident had turned his life upside down. At some point during the 80s, Walters had been in his office looking out the window when a bright blue beam suddenly struck him. There was a humming noise that never seemed to cease, and a blast of air before hearing the voice of an entity, although he described it as the voice from the UFO. It was a soft voice, and Walters couldn't decipher anything being said, but he knew that the UFO was there. It was November of 1987 when he was able to snap some Polaroids of a large unidentified floating object right outside the window. It hovered 200 feet off the ground and looked as though it was something from a Spielberg film. The pictures were later published in the Sentinel, a local newspaper. Trying to authenticate these Polaroids appeared to be an impossible task. In December of that year, he reportedly had another experience with the blue beam. This time he had seen the UFO, and it projected a blue light that covered his body. He tried to reach for his camera, but his arms wouldn't let him. He was blue, and so were his arms. He described the sensation of compression, as though the beam was pressing down on him with just enough force to prevent him from moving. A few months later, another witness saw the object, Walter's wife, Frances. It appeared above the family's pool before disappearing back into the sky. The two stayed up for the rest of the night, trying to figure out how to move forward from this event. The impact of this sighting on the local community was profound, leading to a surge in reports of UFO sightings. One such sighting came from a local councilwoman who had seen an orange unidentified object dash across the sky before completely vanishing. A local doctor confirmed such accounts after seeing a silent, disc-shaped craft hovering above the pier while out on his morning jog. The next report would come from a family of 3 who'd seen the alien spacecraft in the neighborhood that Walters lived in. It was Denise Boone and her 2 daughters who spotted the entity in the South Side neighborhood. It was a spinning mechanical creation that hovered just above the trees. The girls were the first to see it and ran inside to get their mother. She described it as something that didn't take the shape of a plane or a helicopter. It was a sight that seemed to defy all earthly explanations, truly otherworldly in nature. In 1994, a hospital had taken some random goo and placed it under a microscope. They found that it contained human white cells. This goo came from the sky following an event known as the Oakville blobs. It was the 7th of August in Oakville, Washington, when rain began to fall at 3 in the morning, covering 20 square miles. Rain was common in the area, and residents soon began to notice something unusual. It was gelatinous, a sort of jelly blob that had never been seen before. Over 3 weeks, it rained jelly blobs 6 times. When it began, an officer, David Lacey, had been on patrol with a friend as the rain started. He turned his windshield wipers on, and instead of wiping away some droplets, it just smeared across the glass. Because of the now obscured visibility, Lacey was forced to pull over into a gas station where he tried to clean it off manually, wearing a pair of latex gloves just in case. It felt the way it looked. and it looked like clear jello. A resident, Dottie Hearn, waited for the rains to cease before stepping outside. Initially mistaking the jelly blobs for hail, upon touching the substance, she felt a wave of discomfort. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a nightmare. Later that day, Lacey, Dottie, and many other Oakville residents fell violently ill. They struggled to breathe, their vision blurred. They felt increasingly nauseous and experienced a heightened sense of vertigo. Beverly Roberts, another resident, described the town as being plagued by flu-like symptoms that persisted for 2 to 3 months. Even pets that came into contact with the goo fell ill. Dottie had been feeling weak and cold, and later moved to the hospital and was diagnosed with a severe inner ear infection. Her daughter managed to collect a sample of a blob, believing it may be connected to her mother's illness. And this is how the sample ended up in a lab and was found to contain the human cells. It was then sent to a microbiologist, Mike McDowell, who found that the goo was teeming with 2 different kinds of bacteria, one of which lives in the human digestive system. Due to this, he concluded that it was human waste that likely fell from an airplane. But the Federal Aviation Administration requires that the waste be dyed blue, but this substance was perfectly see-through. Regulations also prevented pilots from releasing waste mid-flight. Later testing carried out by another microbiologist, Tim Davis, determined that there was eukaryotic cells, a cell that's present in most living organisms, indicating that this glob was once living. One theory pointed to military testing that's run at sea. It was thought that the test had destroyed a nearby school of jellyfish, which sent them flying right into the atmosphere and later rained down again. But many questioned the validity of this theory. Some suggested that Oakville was a test subject for more sinister military experiments. Unfortunately, all of the uncollected blobs disappeared, and there are no remaining samples at the Washington Department of Health. In fact, they have no record of receiving any reports of a gelatinous rain. Without these crucial samples, the truth about the Oakville blobs remains frustratingly out of reach. November 29, 1980. Dear Mother and Father, I've gone away to walk aboard an alien spaceship, as recurring dreams assured me a 42-month interstellar voyage to explore the vast universe, then return. I'm leaving behind all my possessions to you, as I'll no longer require the use of any. Please use the instructions in my will as a guide to help. This is the enigmatic letter left to Granger Taylor's parents upon his departure on the evening of the 29th of November in 1980. It was a night of heavy torrential rains and gale-force winds that ripped across Vancouver Island in British Columbia. During this violent storm, Taylor, a 32-year-old, soft-spoken mechanical genius, taped this very note to his parents' door. Initially, it wasn't an entire surprise because the mechanic had built a spaceship-like creation in the backyard and alleged that he was talking with aliens, but the family didn't think that he would actually lift off and disappear into the sky. Taylor was heading out on an alien adventure, entrusting his possessions and his loyal dog, Lady, to them. Then he stepped outside, disappearing into the darkness in his pink pickup truck. It wasn't certain what fueled the man's belief that he could speak with aliens, but whatever it was, he seemed set on his voyage. He was convinced that he'd been chosen by the otherworldly beings to fulfill a greater purpose, which would exceed any earthly accomplishment that he could possibly make. His disappearance remains one of Canada's most enduring mysteries, with no possible end in sight. The questions centered around the possible use of psychedelics, an undiagnosed illness, or if the man really did hitch a ride with extraterrestrials that he'd been conversing with. The first possible piece of evidence hadn't come about the man's possible whereabouts until 6 years later. It was in 1986 when an explosion site was found, and remnants of a truck were discovered littered across the expanse. The authorities found that the VIN matched Taylor's Datsun pickup, but the scraps were blue, not pink. Robert Keller, the missing man's best friend, denied that these remnants belonged to that same truck, asserting again that Taylor's vehicle was not pink. In 2019, a documentary called Spaceman was released, exploring what may have happened to the man and what his life was like just a few days before his disappearance. Perhaps he's embarking on his voyage back home, the only possibility left now since no new clues have ever been unearthed. And until legitimate evidence comes about the fate of Granger Taylor, he remains alive in the eyes of his friends and family. Tucked below the foothills of the Second Watchung Mountain, just off Somerville Road, lies the captivating Fairlock Castle. This French Norman-style building, nestled in the Bernards Township of New Jersey, is a sight to behold. Its history, a blend of heartbreak and the paranormal, adds an intriguing layer to its beauty. In 1923, Bill Beatty, his wife Sarah, and his brother Frank began designing Fairlock. It was set to have 29 rooms, a slate roof, stained glass windows, homemade floor tiles, a great hall, a tower, and a wonderful winding staircase. It was designed by Bill himself, based on his ancestors' home in England. By 1930, the building began on the 150-acre property in Basking Ridge, and the brothers had just the right amount of money for it as well. The castle built was Bill's dream house. Unfortunately, though, he would never get to see it completed, because in 1931, the 45-year-old succumbed to a bitter case of the flu. For 5 more years, the mansion remained unfinished, and Sarah Beatty never remarried. But she would raise her 4 children in the castle that her husband built, where they remained until 1941. Following this, the estate would then be used as an all-boys school, serving this purpose for decades. Fairlock was sold in 1972 to Don and Carol Burlingame, and remodeling began. It was then that the paranormal activity would begin as well. Carol had been the first to figure out that something unnatural was lurking in the house. She also had a friend who was an amateur parapsychologist, who would be brought in to investigate. Dr. Michaeline Mayer had told of a presence in the house. It was a friendly one and male. Carol thought a seance might be the way to get rid of the wandering spirit, but Mayer insisted that they best leave him alone. So the married couple continued on with their lives and soon moved into the estate. The two knew there was a presence but didn't realize how unrested it really was. After settling in, they began to hear hammering noises that bounced off the walls down the hallway. Footsteps echoed up and down the staircase, and eventually, Don and Carol accepted that they were sharing their new home with the ghost of Bill Beatty. The being almost demonstrated just how much he really cared about his home, and showed it in an unusual way. One day, the couple opted to go for a drive, and Don suggested that the windows be closed for the coming rain. But Carol didn't think there would be any rain and left the windows open. The two went out, and lo and behold, it began to rain. Upon their return, they found every single window, each of which opened from the inside, had been closed and latched. There was not a single drop of rain in the house. The two wanted to learn more about the history surrounding the castle, and found that Bill's ghost had been in the mansion long before they moved in. In 1934, 3 years after his passing, Sarah was searching for her next bracelet with the help of Eugene Melville, a man who worked for Bill and his wife. While searching for a bracelet, a figure appeared on the balcony, and the widow cried out, stating that it was her husband. The figure didn't stay long enough to be examined, but the woman knew exactly who it was. It was the 13th of August, 1956, a day marked by the escalating Suez Crisis and the looming Soviet threat. On this day, the RAF launched a fleet of aircraft to intercept a mysterious object that had breached the United Kingdom's radar shield. This unidentified vehicle was seen circling a nuclear-armed base in Suffolk. The events that followed were shrouded in secrecy for decades, with the British government never offering a satisfactory explanation. The incident was listed as unexplained during a secret briefing to ministers the following year, adding to the mystery. The case would later be awarded an iconic status in ufology and became the second most famous incident behind the Rendlesham Forest event in 1980. But our incident was the only one listed as an unexplained event by the Colorado University study of UFOs that was commissioned in 1969 by the U.S. Air Force. The story took place in the vicinity of Lakenheath-Bentwaters in Suffolk, where an airbase was situated, and the occurrence would later become known as the Lakenheath-Bentwaters incident. It would also be the event that was enough to convince several scientists, like Dr. J. Allen Hynek, that UAPs needed some serious study. A reconstructed retelling of the UFO incident went something like this. The evening of the 13th, the skies were clear, and the atmosphere was calm in eastern England. As the day drew to a close, nothing indicated that the world was about to experience the most amazing UFO military encounters. At 9:30 that evening, the USAF radar at RAF-Bentwaters picked up on an unidentified object that was 25 to 30 miles east of the base. It moved at 4,000 miles per hour and inexplicably disappeared, heading in a northwestern direction. Clearly, this was no regular airplane, jet, or aircraft. A second airman had also been watching his radar elsewhere when he saw two formations of slow-traveling blips. Very quickly, the RAF got a Venom fighter in the air at Water Beach near Cambridge. But right after it took off, one of the winged fuel tanks crashed just outside the city, and the craft was forced to turn back. The airbase then sent out two USA FT-33 jets as a training exercise. They were instructed to search for the UFOs, which could be seen on radar at Bentwaters. The two pilots came back empty-handed, with one of them, Chuck Metz, believing that odd weather conditions were causing the blips. The incident slowly subsided, but then another object, traveling at hypersonic speed, dashed across radar scopes, and just seconds later, one airman who'd been in the control tower saw an incredibly bright light whiz over his head, but it made no sound. Later, a pilot who was in a C-47 transport aircraft reportedly saw some blurry lights beneath his plane. He explained that it was traveling incredibly fast and was dashing from east to west. Bentwaters called Lakenheath and instructed that the USAF base should keep an eye out for odd activity. The air traffic supervisor, Forrest Perkins, headed over to the controllers and checked their screens. It didn't take long for blips to pop up. These objects would stop and start in a strange way, inconsistent with any aircraft known to man. The blips were heading north, traveling at 400 to 600 miles per hour, and more echoes were spotted by a second radar, which was using a different frequency. Perkins managed to get word all the way to the RAF fighter command responsible for air defense in the area. It was midnight when the senior officer, Flight Lieutenant Freddie Wimbledon, looked at his screens and saw something up in the air, 10 to 20,000 feet over the United Kingdom. It was behaving abnormally, and he reported that it was traveling at an impossible speed. He then set up an interception team of 4, and they were instructed to take action. Soon, one of the pilots spoke the words, "Contact Judy." This meant that the navigator had the object on his radar screen and didn't need any more help from ground control. No less than a few seconds later, this pilot changed his decision, stating that he'd lost contact and needed more help. There was a sweep across the screens on ground control, and then the object reappeared. The target was behind him. Situated in Lake Wales, Florida, is a house that should be avoided. It looks like any other ordinary house, but as we know, appearances can be deceiving. And if you want to know which house to avoid, it's the one at 1424 Lakeview Road. It began in 1991, when 19-year-old Alan Mann was living in a home with his parents. He was working night shifts and would usually catch up on sleep during the day. One day, at around 3 p.m., Mann had settled down to catch some sleep when suddenly the image of a woman appeared before him. He explained that it had turned away from the door as though it was leaving, and by the time he was able to get up, the figure had turned the corner and disappeared. He searched the house looking for the woman, but nothing was there. He told his mother about what he had seen, but she didn't believe him. That seemed to be the end of it until the man's bride, Linda, moved in. Linda had been watching some TV with her mother-in-law, Sandra. When Sandra looked down at the end of the couch, she noticed a white smoky apparition, and so did her dog, Prince. The dog was now on his feet, but by that time it vanished. Linda hadn't seen the apparition that day, but was already fully convinced that the place was haunted, so she got a friend to come over with the Ouija board. The board spelled out the name Kramer, but Mann's father still needed convincing. He didn't believe that they had anything to worry about and didn't want to admit that there was some ghostly presence floating around the house. One of Mann's close friends enjoyed heading over for coffee, but this stopped following one of the paranormal events. The two were at the kitchen table having their coffee when the friend stopped and announced that he needed to leave. The friend alluded to a being that had just walked into the living room and quickly expressed that he never wanted to return. While Mann and his wife were aware of this eerie atmosphere in the house, they were not prepared for what would happen next. In a sudden and unprovoked attack, Linda turned on her husband. According to Mann, She seemed to lose control, attacking him while emitting an evil laugh. But Linda had no memory of the terrifying incident. The once harmless ghost had now taken a malevolent personality, one that even David, the father, could not ignore. The family sought help from spiritualists and believers who advised them to place salt around the house and under their beds. The household even attempted a home exorcism, but to no avail. It didn't take long for the house to begin to smell, and the family suffered from headaches. Some of the rooms in the building became very cold, and then the voices started. It sounded like a mass of voices muttering on top of one another, and nothing was distinguishable. The Manns had had enough, and the couple decided to move out, but later they would divorce following the torment they experienced. And soon the story would reach the Center for Paranormal Studies. 3 of the Institute's founders loaded up their equipment and headed to the house, one of which was the parapsychologist Andrew Nichols. According to him, Linda and Mann's old bedroom seemed to emit the most amount of energy. 2 Polaroid pictures even proved this. In one of the pictures, a human figure stood in the forefront. More experts, such as paleontologists, radiologists, and more would also set up in the house, and they could determine that something extremely odd was going on there. Something beyond natural explanation. The house was haunted. 2 months later, one of the local ministers went by the house, and the activity seemingly stopped, but this was likely due to no longer having victims to latch onto. One thing is certain about the evening of the 11th of October, 1973. Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker Jr. would arrive in an absolute panic at the Pascagoula, Mississippi Sheriff's Department. They pointed out puncture wounds on their arms and claimed to have been abducted by aliens. The authorities attempted to catch them out in a lie, but that effort didn't work. It was also revealed that they both passed a polygraph test. And the story behind the frantic behavior of the 2 individuals was nothing less than disturbing, and it went something like this. Hickson was Parker's shipyard foreman, and the 2 decided to head out on a fishing trip after work. They made their way to an abandoned boat launch on the Pascagoula River, staying there until the sun began to disappear. It was dusk when the 2 heard a strange whirring sound, followed by flashes of blue light reflecting off of the water. They looked to the skies, and above them, there hovered an oval-shaped object, estimated to be between 30 to 40 feet in length and 8 to 10 feet high. It was the classic description of an alien UFO. But the 2 were not prepared for what would happen next. 3 entities emerged as the craft hovered there, floating just like their vehicle. Hickson and Parker became paralyzed as the creatures grabbed them with pincer-like appendages and pulled them towards the floating dome. They were still conscious by the time they entered, and were about to undergo some strange sort of medical exam, performed by what they described as a sizable robotic eye. The eye would make a buzzing mechanical sound for the duration of this exam, until the men were dropped back at the Delta. Hickson reportedly found that his friend was standing up with his arms raised, screaming. They watched as the enigmatic object sped off, and the 2 ran off for help. They soon found themselves at the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, where the officers believed they were intoxicated or maybe lying. The effort that the investigators attempted, the one that was supposed to catch them out in a lie, involved secretly leaving a recording device in the interview room, hoping to catch the men dropping the act and exposing their lie. But they never did, and they sounded genuinely terrified and expressed concerns for their families. Later, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, a professor of astronomy at Northwestern University, investigated the case. His conclusion was that this was a very real and frightening experience. An artistic rendering of Hickson and Parker's descriptions of the beasts soon followed. They were 6 feet tall with robotic undertones. They were said to be gray and had elephant-like skin, slit-shaped mouths, and crab-like pincers. At the time of the incident, Hickson was 42 years old and well-known in the community. He appeared to feel more capable of handling media pressure, and recounted the event to anybody who listened. In 1983, he published a book based on his experience. Parker, though, was just 19 at the time and new to the area, where he was trying to make some extra money. He told the media that he basically blacked out and couldn't remember anything. This was his only lie. It was reported that Parker bathed in bleach following his visit to the sheriff's department. He skipped town, got married, and found work. He would quit whenever someone recognized him at one of these jobs. In recent years, the man entered his 60s and even published a book of his own, but explained that the entire thing had turned his life upside down. Following the ordeal, the riverbank where the incident took place got a historical marker in 2019, and it was named one of the best documented alien abduction cases. In 1886, a mining engineer, John Reed, stumbled upon a Native American group who told him of a nearby cave. It was Lovelock Cave, a legendary attraction that can be found in Nevada. He couldn't begin digging around the site for unspecified reasons, but soon others had gotten word of it, and the cave was attracting even more attention. In 1911, a group of miners were digging for some fertilizer when they discovered some unusual artifacts, and in 1912 and 1924, more excavations were carried out. These digs would uncover the remains of what would later become known as the Lovelock Giants. The beings, measuring some 8 to 10 feet in length, left historians scratching their heads in bewilderment. Strangely, something else was uncovered as well. It was a 15-inch long sandal that showed signs of having been worn. A boulder with a giant handprint was also among the findings. Later, a local newspaper reported another discovery of giant beings in Lake Titicaca near Lovelock, further deepening the mystery and baffling the world of archaeology and science even more. What could these beings be? Who were they, and where did they come from? These discoveries prompted some positivity in the questions regarding the authenticity of an ancient urban legend. It's this ancient story that may give us the answers we're looking for. Urban legends often stem from the oddest of places, usually from occurrences that ancient societies couldn't explain. Folklore is often left shrouded in mystery, and very few are able to deduce the truth about it. Nevada was once home to many indigenous tribes who inhabited the area long before Europeans. One of the Native American tribes had an incredible legend that connected directly to Lovelock and the beings found within it. They spoke of a civilization of giants adorned with red hair. According to the passed down stories, these beings lived near Lovelock Cave. They were described as being 8 feet tall and cannibalistic in nature, often preying on people residing nearby. Could the beings found in the cave and the surrounding areas belong to the giants that these Native Americans spoke of? Support for this legend was another documented event that came from a 16th century Spanish conquistador. It was a tale depicting a civilization of giants coming across the ocean on their long-reed rafts. More remains have been found high up in the Andes Mountains, with some of them having preserved red hair still attached. But some ancients attribute this reddish tone to an interaction of the material with the environment. The connection between these archaeological findings and the Native American legend is a fascinating puzzle that continues to intrigue researchers. According to the legend, there was warfare between them and the neighboring giants as they sought to chase the predators away. The tribe succeeded, sending the red-haired beings to seek refuge in a nearby cave, Lovelock. The tribes demanded that the giants emerge and face them, but they refused. They then began to fire arrows at them and started a fire at the mouth of the cave. The giant beings were defeated, perishing in the cave while others tried to flee, only to succumb to their prey. Despite these legends, the archaeological finds, and the DNA surrounding these discoveries, the existence of these tall creatures remains unconfirmed. But for some, the answer is quite obvious, and can be found in an ancient story, one of the few that may be based on factual explanation for what a primitive society perceived. The need for further exploration and analysis is urgent, as it may hold the key to confirming the existence of these mysterious beings. Back in 2016, one family would flee their home in a panic and head 800 kilometers north, and we still have no idea as to why. The Trump family consisted of 51-year-old Mark, his wife, 53-year-old Jacoba, and their 3 children, 29-year-old Rihanna, 25-year-old Mitchell, and 22-year-old Ella. The family was running a red currant farm from their property in Sylvan, Melbourne, and each of them worked hard to keep it going. Suddenly, though, on the 26th of August in 2016, the family left the property with no warning, climbed into their car, and fled north. They left their house unlocked and their horses unattended to. They also failed to take their credit cards and passports along with them on this impromptu road trip. It seemed as though they were running away from something, or maybe even someone. It didn't take long for friends and family to grow concerned when they were unable to reach them. The police were contacted and arrived at the home to find it in a state of disarray. It looked as though someone had been searching for something inside of the financial records, which were found sprawled across the home. The family also failed to take their cell phones along with them after Mark and Jacoba had banned technology on this peculiar trip. But Mitchell, though, acted against this and brought his device anyway. When they were 30 kilometers away from their home, the rest of the family forced him to throw it out the window. They were convinced that it was being used to track them. They journeyed through the first day and then the first night, and later reached Bathurst, 800 kilometers away from home. Around 7 the following morning, Mitchell was the first to become disillusioned and separated from his family. Later that morning, the remaining members then began heading east, heading for a popular tourist destination, the Jenolan Caves. When they arrived there, though, the two daughters also opted to part with their parents, so they took a car and headed to Goulburn, where they later reported their parents missing. The two sisters would then decide to split up at a gas station. Ella mentioned wanting to feed the horses, and they parted ways. She then made her way home and was the first of the 5 to do so. Authorities promptly greeted her upon her arrival. The following day, Mitchell was next, but something seemed odd. The brother and sister appeared to be unaffected by their family's sudden onset of psychosis. They seemed normal, but just a bit perplexed by this mysterious ordeal. But the other sibling, Rihanna, was much more affected and was discovered in the back of a truck bed. She was catatonic and seemingly suffering from amnesia, not knowing who or where she was. The truck driver was startled to find this individual in his truck and quickly contacted the local police. Rihanna was taken to the Goulburn Hospital. 3 of the 5 members were accounted for, leaving just Mark and his wife. Public interest grew, and a search was conducted to locate the car. It was determined that the couple had driven back to the Melbourne area from the caves. The pair split up. Jacoba went north, and the next day she was found wandering around Yass, but was agitated and subsequently taken to the hospital. She was later reunited with her daughter at the Goulburn Hospital. Mark was still in Wangaratta and was spotted after tailgating a couple reportedly playing Pokemon Go. Eventually, the couple stopped their car, and so did Mark. He exited the vehicle and ran toward them before stopping in the middle of the road. He stared at them briefly before disappearing into a nearby park. According to one source, the family had been under the impression that they were coming to be robbed or even the victims of a homicide, of which the authorities would find no evidence. Back at the ranch, Ella and Mitchell made a news appearance, baffled by their parents' behavior and pleading for their father to return. After 6 days, Mark was finally found on the road near the Wangaratta airport and released into the care of his brother, a police officer. Investigators found no threats against the family, and the reason for their sudden trip remains a mystery. There was no evidence of narcotics, and they didn't belong to any cult or religious sector. Ella and Mitchell explained that they'd never seen anything like this and couldn't explain it either. They just feared for their life and opted to flee. It was later explained that a likely explanation was that the family became overwhelmed with paranoia, which was fueled by each other, an event referred to as folie à deux, a shared delusion. Rihanna later spoke out about the situation, explaining that she wasn't sure why, but her father felt as though their lives were in immediate danger, which fueled everyone else's fear. On the 5th of October 2017, 61-year-old Tateki Kutsi, a father of 6, was admitted to the hospital in South Africa. He'd just been transferred to a ward following an abdominal surgery. It was here that he was set to make a full recovery. One of the attending nurses had just checked in on the patient and stepped out to get some fresh linen, but when she returned, the recovering patient had disappeared. This was particularly odd since he would have been unable to walk for a certain amount of time following the operation, but he was nowhere to be seen. 2 days later, the patient's family received a worried call from the hospital, wondering if he had made his way home, but he hadn't. During an investigation, the attending nurse explained that she'd last seen him at 5:15 that morning. The family headed back to the hospital, accompanied by police in an attempt to locate their missing relative. It wasn't until 15 days after his admittance that Tateki was found. On the 20th of October, a group of workers had been doing some renovations when they stumbled across something that they least expected to find in the ceiling of the facility. It was Tateki's lifeless body that had found its way into an isolated area of the ceiling. No one could figure out how he'd gotten there or what may have ended his life. According to one article, the hospital would then perform an autopsy and inform the family that the unexpected passing had not been from a complication in the surgical procedure. The staff also allegedly implied that it was not from natural causes. The deceased's family was also given the impression that he was no longer living before being hidden away. The local police department quickly latched on to this mysterious incident, and other researchers declared it was a teleportation case. They attribute this conclusion to the fact that an immobile patient disappeared way too quickly to have gone unnoticed. According to the official statement, the nurse had stepped out rather briefly, but this story didn't end with one victim, but two. A few years later, on the 10th of May in 2019, a construction worker had been doing a house repair when a wall collapsed, breaking his femur. He was rushed to the hospital in South Africa. After an assessment, the man was due to be transferred to another hospital to be treated. But before this could happen, a nurse checked in on him to find the patient no longer there. This case was similar to Tateki's for a few reasons. One of them was this patient was also immobile, meaning that disappearing so quickly all by himself was unlikely. The staff searched for the missing man everywhere, but failing this, they contacted the South African Police Department and reported the man missing. For another 2 weeks, the injured patient would remain missing. It was only when an unbearable smell permeated the hospital that one staff member discovered suspicious fluids dripping from the ceiling, and the man's body was found. On the 25th of May, the storeroom ceiling was checked, and there they found the missing man, in the same position that Tateki was discovered. At the time, the newly appointed official for health explained that they would investigate the case and how the man ended up in the ceiling. She also clarified that the patient was there for a broken femur and not psychiatric concerns, as others had suggested. According to the autopsy report released by the police department, the passing was due to natural causes. Both cases had little to no follow-up information, which only added to the mystery as to how these unrelated men ended up in the ceilings of unrelated hospitals. There exists a few theories about these incidents. Some believe that another patient in both cases may have been involved, but there was no evidence to suggest that this is what happened. Others point to adverse medication effects, such as the use of opioids for pain management. This type of medication could cause psychosis, but both patients were being monitored closely and showed no signs of such adverse effects. Disturbingly, in one of the Reddit forums covering this case, one individual reported that both men didn't pass away from natural causes, and that they'd been placed in the ceiling by something, which was certainly an interesting choice of words. Some criminals just don't know when to quit. One would imagine that once a robber has been caught and proven to not be cut out for a life of crime, they might pursue a different career. But 28-year-old Jaime Sharp from England had other ideas, as he chose to remain a criminal after being ousted as a car thief in 2015. On that occasion, Sharp and an accomplice, 26-year-old James Honeywell, had stolen a valuable Porsche sports car after retrieving the keys from a house during a burglary. And rather than make a quick escape with his ill-gotten vehicle, he decided to brag about it, which proved to be his undoing. During the burglary at the house, the pair stole a television and other smaller items, when they came across the Porsche's keys, and they decided to take that as well. While making their getaway, Sharp thought it would be a good idea to call a few of his friends to boast about the car, and to make matters worse, he recorded the entire event with his phone's camera in 3 separate video clips. In the first of the clips, he can be heard saying to a friend, "Hey you, I'm in a Porsche Boxster, now look, hear the revs." In the second, he's seemingly talking to his girlfriend as he boasts, "Hey babe, do you like the Porsche I'm driving right now? Do you like that Porsche?" In the third clip, he continues by saying, "It's mine babe, obviously come on, I've got links, you know me." But his joy wouldn't last long, as he soon lost control of the car and ended up crashing into a wall, causing him to become trapped inside the vehicle, though he wasn't seriously injured. Proving that there's no honor among thieves, Honeywell realized that his accomplice couldn't escape, and so he decided to flee on his own, leaving Sharp in the lurch as police officers were dispatched to the scene. After his arrest, he would be humiliated even further when the case was featured on a show called Britain's Dumbest Criminals. And while Honeywell managed to evade the law for a short while, he was also soon apprehended. Sharp would receive a sentence of 4 years behind bars, while Honeywell got off lightly with a 35-month sentence. This would be enough to make most people go on the straight and narrow, since Sharp was publicly humiliated for being an inept criminal. But he would soon be featured in the media again, 2 years later, this time thanks to a robbery committed just outside of town. The owner of the house, Portia Shipway, told investigators that she heard her dog barking during the night, but she thought nothing of it and went back to sleep, not realizing that Sharp was in the house stealing her possessions. But when she woke up the next morning, she noticed that her front door was open, and she realized that someone had been inside of her house while she slept, though she first thought that one of her children might have been sleepwalking. But she then realized that her car and some items from her house were missing. Unfortunately for Sharp, when Shipway moved into the house a year earlier, her neighbor had suggested that he change the angle of his security camera to include the exterior of her house, and she agreed. She then checked the security footage and saw Sharp breaking into her house, though she hadn't seen him before and she started to fear that he wouldn't be caught. She then uploaded a few still images of the robber to her Facebook account in hopes that someone would recognize him, and she wasn't disappointed. Several of her Facebook friends got in touch to say that they had seen Sharp featured on the popular TV show, and this information was quickly relayed to investigating officers. Not only did her friends reply to the images, but Sharp's own mother also contacted the police to say that it was her son in the security footage. And so Sharp's fate was sealed. It quickly became apparent that he had no intention of turning his life around, and as in many other cases, he would have carried on committing similar, if not more serious crimes if he hadn't been caught. Police managed to retrieve Shipman's vehicle, and inside, they found the other items that had been stolen. Sharp's lawyer stated that his client has a drinking problem that stemmed from his incidents in the past, and he wanted to apologize to Shipman and her family for putting them through an ordeal that they struggled to recover from. He was ultimately sentenced to 4 years and 4 months in prison after he pleaded guilty to theft of a vehicle, burglary, and driving without a license. Arriving home and finding that your house has been broken into is a harrowing experience that leaves you feeling like your privacy has been invaded, and angry at the fact that your personal belongings are now in the hands of someone who will probably sell it for a measly profit. But it's made all the worse when someone unlawfully enters your house while you're asleep, since you and your loved ones are left vulnerable while they help themselves to whichever of your belongings they desire. This was the exact scenario that played out in 2015, when a 33-year-old burglar named Darren February targeted the house of Simon Cowell, the creator of the massively popular TV show X Factor. February entered the Cowells family home, which is located in Holland Park, London, in the middle of the night while they slept, and helped himself to jewelry and other items worth close to $1.2 million before fleeing. Among the items that were stolen was a ring that by itself was worth over $600,000. He also decided to steal 2 of Cowell's passports, leading the judge in his case to speculate that he only did so because he wanted to brag about the fact that he'd broken into a celebrity's house. February was fortunate in that the family's safe had been left standing open that night because Cowell's wife, Lauren Silverman, had to catch a flight the next morning, and she wanted to make sure that she could retrieve her jewelry without raking the rest of the household. The home does have a security guard, but February's timing was impeccable, as he slipped past him while he was in the bathroom, though he was able to get a good look at the robber as he fled. But this wasn't the last time that the burglar had a run-in with the law. Just a few days after breaking into Cowell's home, he was involved in a vehicular collision that cost the driver of a motorbike, a man named Kenneth Baldwin, his life. And on this occasion, he also decided to flee after being seen talking on his cell phone at the scene. It was also found that the car he was driving was stolen. Added to this is the fact that he received his first conviction when he was just 12 years old, and through the years, he'd committed at least a further 37 burglaries, though those were just the ones that he was found guilty of committing, and there are likely many more that the authorities could not attribute to him. Luckily, February was caught on CCTV while he was carrying out the robbery, and investigators could quickly identify him as the culprit. At his trial, February's lawyer, Giles Newell, claimed that the man in the footage wasn't his client, and that he'd been arrested due to a case of mistaken identity. But this was quickly dismissed when it came to light that the robber had left a pair of gloves at the scene, from which his DNA was extracted. Added to this was further evidence in the form of a handprint that he left on a wall. and it was quickly identified as belonging to February. Police officers also stated that they were aware that February had been engaging in criminal activity in the area at the time, and try as he may, he was unable to convince the jury that he was innocent. Cowell provided a victim impact statement in which he noted that he'd been in fear for his and his family's lives since the burglary took place, since he was worried that the burglar might come back for a second haul. He added that he and his wife had grave concerns for their then 2-year-old son's safety, since they were unaware that a break-in had taken place until they were woken up by the security guard. And he then realized just how vulnerable they actually were while February was stalking around inside their home. At the time of the trial, February was already incarcerated as he was serving time for the collision that he was involved in, for which he received 8.5 years behind bars. The jury took less than an hour to come to a decision, finding February guilty once again and sentencing him to a further 8 years in prison. Some criminals are so brazen that they don't care whether they're caught by CCTV security cameras, and this often leads to their downfall, since there's no way of denying that they were the ones responsible. It seems that this was the attitude of a criminal from Crawley in West Sussex, England, who carried out 2 robberies in broad daylight, but luckily both crimes were captured on CCTV security systems. The first of the 2 crimes was committed by 43-year-old Michael Hooper and occurred on the 10th of April 2022 at an ATM machine located at Sainsbury's supermarket, while his elderly victim was withdrawing cash and he saw an opportunity for a quick and easy payday. In the CCTV footage of this incident, Hooper's victim can be seen withdrawing cash from the ATM while keeping his bicycle secure in front of him. In the background, Hooper can be seen watching the man closely while deciding whether or not to rob him. After finishing his transaction, the man wheels his bike over to a set of trolleys, likely because he'd planned to do some shopping with the money that he'd just withdrawn from his account. At this point, Hooper walks over to him, and it would later be revealed that he asked the man for some money, but he refused, angering the robber. The man tried to conceal the cash under his left arm, but to no avail, as Hooper had been keeping an eye on him the entire time. They then have a brief discussion, during which the man produces an envelope into which he places the cash, and this is when Hooper sees an opportunity and he pounces, trying to snatch the envelope out of the victim's hand. The man quickly turns away and tries to fight him off, but Hooper manages to grab the envelope and throws it to the ground as he walks away after removing the money. He then disappears around a corner, leaving the man shocked and terrified. On the 22nd of May, he committed his second crime at a liquor store, also in Crawley, and on this occasion he was even more brazen. Staff at the store told investigators that Hooper attempted to buy a bottle of whiskey, but his debit card was declined, which angered him. After arguing with staff members, he then reached across the counter and grabbed a bottle of liquor and made a hasty retreat. One would think that he would leave it at that, since he managed to grab what he came for, but Hooper had other plans. Just over an hour after committing the first crime, he returned to the very same store, this time armed with 2 sharpened blades. This incident was also captured by security cameras from inside the store, and they show Hooper casually walking up to the counter, holding both blades out in front of him, pointing them at the cashier. The 2 can be seen arguing back and forth before the cashier decides to make a dash for it, running to the far side of the store to get away from the blade-wielding criminal. Hooper then launches himself partially onto the counter and reaches over, grabbing 2 more bottles of whiskey before running out of the store. Hooper can be seen wearing a blue and white hoodie over his head, but it does little to conceal his identity, as his face is clearly visible to the security cameras. As he makes his way for the door, a customer walks in, and they have to jump out of the way to avoid Hooper crashing into them. The cashier managed to activate the store's security alarm, and when police officers arrived, the security footage was checked, and Hooper was quickly identified. It took very little time to track the robber down, and he was taken into custody. He was charged with both robberies and 1 count of burglary and 2 counts of possession of a sharpened blade in public. He would end up pleading guilty to all of the charges, since all of the crimes had been captured on surveillance cameras and he had virtually no defense. A police spokesman stated that while it's all well and good that Hooper confessed to his crimes, this did little to lessen the impact they had on his victims, who were left shaken and afraid as a result. He would eventually be found guilty of all 5 charges and sentenced to a total of 44 months behind bars. Investigators also noted that were it not for the clear security footage of the crimes, it would have been much harder to track the criminal down, and he would likely have gone on to commit many further robberies. Police officers' jobs would be so much easier if criminals were easy to identify, but sometimes some of the most calculating and sly criminals are people who most of us would never expect, which is very true for the case involving 55-year-old Lois Riess from Blooming Prairie in Minnesota. Riess looks like a stable, normal woman, but in March of 2018, she committed a crime that most people would consider unthinkable when she ended the life of her husband, David Riess, with a firearm. But at first, no one knew that the crime had been committed, and it was only when David hadn't shown up for work for 2 weeks that his business partner started to suspect that something may have happened to him. On the 23rd of March, his partner contacted the Dodge City Police Department, asking them to do a welfare check at his house, since he hadn't been seen by any of his coworkers for some time. Officers then traveled to the couple's home and were shocked to find David inside, and they instantly realized that they were dealing with a homicide. They became suspicious when Lois was nowhere to be found, and it became clear that she was the culprit when it came to light that she'd stolen funds to the tune of $21,000 from David's business account by forging signatures on his checks and executing illegal transfers. After acquiring the money, she fled the area and traveled to Diamond Joe's Casino in Iowa, but by the time investigators learned where she was, she'd already moved on and was clearly doing her best not to get caught. But in order to avoid being sent to prison, she'd come up with a plan, and when she sat down to have a few drinks at the Smoke and Oyster Brewery in Fort Myers Beach on the 5th of April, she saw her chance when she met a woman named Pamela Hutchinson. Riess realized that she and Hutchinson looked a lot alike, and she decided that she may just get away with her crime if she were to assume the other woman's identity. In CCTV security footage from the bar, the two women can be seen chatting, but unbeknownst to Hutchinson, Riess had already started planning her demise. 4 days after meeting Riess in the bar, Hutchinson was found deceased in her condo, and investigators noted that her purse had been ransacked with all of her money, debit cards, credit cards, and identity documents missing. They then checked CCTV security footage of the area and quickly identified Riess as being there around the time that the crime was committed. For 2 days, Riess could be seen in the footage spending time at the condo, but Hutchinson is nowhere to be seen, and it was believed that Riess had already ended her life at this point. She then jumped in Hutchinson's car, a white Acura TL, and made her escape before anyone could notice that something was amiss. She then traveled through Louisiana, making her way to Texas, specifically Corpus Christi. But this is where the trail went cold, and a manhunt was underway to find the now double murderer. Investigators' jobs were made all the harder by the fact that Riess looked like any normal woman of her age, and very few people would have ever suspected that she was capable of carrying out the heinous crimes that she did. She quickly became known by the moniker Fugitive Grandma. Now convinced that she was successfully assuming Hutchinson's identity, Riess started using her victims' credit cards and even wearing her clothes, later stating that she enjoyed wearing one particular hat as she considered it to be a prized possession. The footage of Riess at the Oyster Bar was made available to the public and broadcast on several news channels, which ultimately ensured her capture. On the 19th of April, she was enjoying a few cocktails at a waterfront restaurant in Texas when one restaurant staff member recognized her from the footage, and they contacted the police. 2 federal deputy marshals made their way to the restaurant and found that Riess was still there. She was immediately taken into custody and charged with grand theft of a motor vehicle, and criminal use of personal identification information of a deceased individual. To avoid the death penalty, Riess accepted a plea deal, bringing relief to Hutchinson's family, who stated that they hoped she would never see the outside of a prison again. They soon got their wish, as Riess was sentenced to spend the rest of her life behind bars, since she would no longer have the right to appeal her sentence. In August of 2023, 34-year-old Danelo Cavalcante was arrested after he ended the life of his girlfriend in 2021, and he was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. He was then sent to Chester County Prison near Philadelphia, where he would spend a short stint before being transferred elsewhere. But after spending just 7 days in the facility, He hatched a plan to escape, and the entire incident was captured by security cameras at the prison. The footage shows Cavalcante standing in a doorway that's flanked by a wall on each side. He then proceeds to place his hands on one wall while lifting himself up, placing his feet against the opposite wall, and then climbing up and out of view of the cameras. He then made his way onto the prison's roof, avoiding being snagged by razor wire on top of the two walls, after which he simply jumped down and fled. A search was immediately organized after it came to light that Cavalcante had escaped more than an hour after he had done so, but he soon made his way out of the primary search area, changing his clothes and shaving his beard in an attempt to avoid identification. The tower guard who was on duty during the escape was immediately fired. Next, he managed to steal a car and make his way north, where he met up with a few of his former co-workers, but he had to leave the car behind as it had run out of gas by this point. The search area was then expanded, and investigators came under fire, as it was thought that they should have apprehended the fugitive before he managed to travel out of the area in the first place. News of the escape quickly spread, and the CCTV footage of Cavalcante's escape was made available to the public, in hopes that someone would recognize him, though people were warned not to approach him as he was considered dangerous since he'd already ended one person's life. Not long after, a man driving his car in northern Chester County called the police to report that he'd seen a man who looked like Cavalcante hiding in the shadows of a line of trees by the roadside. Upon checking the area, Cavalcante had already left, but they found a set of prints that had been left by his prison shoes. A resident of a nearby house then reported that a pair of boots had been stolen from their front porch, and it became clear that the man was indeed Cavalcante. Cavalcante then saw an opportunity when he noticed an open garage, and inside he found a firearm which he then stole. He was lucky to escape though, as the homeowner found him in the garage and fired several shots at him but missed. This led to a new search being conducted over a 10-square-mile area, with hundreds of searchers attending in a bid to find the dangerous fugitive. Police believe that he'd been in contact with his sister during this time, as she was evasive and gave conflicting answers to their questions, though this is mere speculation. At one point, Cavalcante was captured on CCTV security footage in Pocopson Township, in which he can be seen creeping through shrubberies in someone's yard. The surrounding community was immediately informed that he'd been spotted in the area, leading to several nearby schools being closed and homeowners in the area being told to ensure that their doors were kept locked. It also led to several roads being closed, with police officers continuing their search despite heavy rain falling in the region. This is when investigators got the break that they were looking for. A plane that had been fitted with heat signature detection equipment aided in the search, and before long it picked up Cavalcante's signature as he hid in dense undergrowth. But the plane had to leave the area when the weather suddenly worsened, and it would only be 4 hours later that officers could start advancing on his position. Unbeknownst to Cavalcante, he had been surrounded as he continued his attempt to crawl to safety. His efforts were in vain, as a police dog was sent in after him, and he was quickly subdued without any further incident, despite the fact that he was carrying a firearm. Members of the surrounding community expressed their relief at the fact that the fugitive had finally been apprehended, as they'd been living in fear for the 2 weeks that he was on the run. Cavalcante will now face an extra charge of felony escape for his efforts, and the prison where he escaped from will undergo many changes to ensure that a similar incident doesn't occur in the future. On the 5th of October 2023, 33-year-old Katherine Ferguson from Cody, Wyoming, disappeared without a trace while she was on a road trip. She was accompanied by her ex-boyfriend and the 2 children that they had together, and they even had a conversation with the police officer at one point, but her disappearance remains unsolved. Katherine and her ex-boyfriend, 26-year-old Adam Shane Aviles Jr., had been dating on and off for 8 years, and by all accounts it was a rocky relationship, which is why she decided to relocate to Alabama, since she'd started to become afraid of Aviles. But as the months passed, the children started missing their father, and in October, Katherine decided to contact him, and she asked him to get her and the children so they could travel back to Wyoming. On the 5th of October, they stopped at a gas station in Truman, Arkansas to rest, and here they were seen by a police officer who decided to perform a routine check, and the footage that was caught by his body cam has been made available to the public. It shows Katherine sitting in the passenger side of the car, a black 1999 Dodge Durango with the door open, which the officer found suspicious, and hence he decided to check that everything was okay. He asks where the couple is headed and whether they have identification, to which they readily comply. All the while, Aviles can be heard arguing with the officer, asking whether Arkansas is an ID state. He also asks if someone called the police on them, to which the officer replies that he was merely driving by and noticed the suspicious vehicle, which prompted him to stop. He then asks Katherine for her first and last name, while patiently waiting for them both to produce their IDs. Katherine then explains that she and Aviles had just gotten back together and that they were headed to Wyoming, which seems to satisfy the officer, and he then heads back to his patrol car without incident. Aviles' car would be pulled over by officers again on the 9th and 11th, and on both occasions Katherine was not present in the car, but a large pile of clothes was seen on the passenger seat. One officer later stated that he believed a firearm had been discharged in or near the vehicle, as he spotted a hole in the passenger side door. He also noted that it had been covered with duct tape, possibly in an attempt to conceal the damage. This was the last time that Katherine was seen, and on the 2nd of November, her mother became concerned when she hadn't heard from her, and so she decided to file a missing person report with the Cody Police Department. Aviles' Durango was found 3 days later, where it had been abandoned in a remote area near Cody, and what investigators found inside left them worried for Katherine's safety. The car seemingly was covered in trash bags in an effort to conceal it, and inside, investigators noticed a strange smell that they suspected could be biological material. When the car was thoroughly searched, their fears were confirmed when they found material and a loaded magazine inside. Strangely, the passenger seat had been removed, and they noted that several cleaning wipes were lying around the vehicle. Since he was a felon, Aviles was arrested for possession of the magazine, and he'll stand trial in late January of 2024. When he was questioned about Katherine's whereabouts, he stated that she left him and the children at some point while they were in Little Rock and never returned. He's adamant that he has nothing to do with her disappearance and that he has no idea where she could be. While Aviles is a suspect in Katherine's disappearance, he's not been charged as of yet, and the investigation into her case is ongoing. She's described as having brown hair and blue eyes. She stands 5 foot 9 inches tall, and at the time that she went missing, weighed around 150 to 180 pounds. It isn't known what Katherine was wearing the last time she was seen, but in the body cam footage, she can be seen wearing a peach-colored shirt. If you have any information on Katherine's whereabouts, you're asked to contact the Park County Sheriff's Department at 307-527-8700, quoting the agency case number 23972. Katherine's NamUs case number is MP111971. Being abducted must be an absolutely horrifying experience that's not easily forgotten. But it can only be made worse if the kidnappers are never caught, since there's always a chance that they'll attempt to carry out their heinous crime again. If the kidnappers are known to their victim, they're usually quick to be tracked down and taken into custody. But in a case that occurred in Sydney, Australia in July of 2022, the would-be abductors have never been identified, and hence investigators have released CCTV footage of the incident in case someone is able to recognize one of the culprits. The incident took place on the 7th of July at a gas station on Windsor Road, and in the footage, a white Mitsubishi SUV can be seen arriving at the gas station, but it doesn't pull up to any of the fuel pumps and instead makes a wide turn before heading to the parking lot area, where 2 other cars can be seen. The car then stops behind the 2 parked cars, and for a few moments, nothing happens until 3 men can be seen exiting the vehicle, and an unnamed man can be seen walking into view. As the 3 men get out, it's revealed that the man in the passenger seat is carrying a bat of some kind and clearly has nefarious intentions. The man who's standing next to the car then seemingly realizes that something's wrong and he attempts to flee, but the 3 men chase after him and attempt to force him into their car. The man manages to get away, and the kidnappers are forced to leave empty-handed. The man's reported to have suffered no injuries, and the initial investigation was handled by local investigators before it was handed over to the State Crime Command's Robbery and Serious Crime Squad. The vehicle used in the attempted kidnapping was later found in Macquarie Fields. or it had been abandoned and set alight. The intended victim seemingly didn't know the three abductors, and at this stage it isn't known what the motive for the kidnapping was, but he was able to give a thorough description of the three culprits. He believes one of the men to either be a Pacific Islander or possibly Maori. He added that he had a solid build, and while he had no hair on top of his head, he had a black mullet hairstyle. He also recalled that the man was wearing a white shirt, a black jacket, and black tracksuit pants with black shoes. The second man is thought to have the same ethnicity as the first, but his face is hidden behind a black face covering of some kind. He was wearing a white, gray, and black hooded jumper, and gray tracksuit pants and white shoes. The third and last man was seen wearing a black balaclava with black pants, a black top, and white sneakers, and all three still remain on the run after their unsuccessful abduction attempt. If you recognize any of the men in this footage or have any information that could help lead to their whereabouts, you're urged to contact Crime Stoppers at 1-800-333-000. In recent times, there's been an increasing trend amongst robbers where a vehicle is used to smash the front windows of a business, giving the culprits fast and easy access to the interior, and hence making it harder to apprehend them before they get the chance to flee. Many of these crimes are caught by CCTV cameras, since most businesses have these cameras installed in case such an incident occurs. But the robbers aren't always identified, since they're aware of the cameras and usually take precautions against being recognized. On the 27th of October, 2023, a gas station in Kelso, New South Wales, Australia, was targeted in one of these robberies that have become known as ram raids. Police officers were dispatched to the gas station at around 2:30 a.m. that morning after someone called in to report that a vehicle had been driven backwards through the business's front entrance. The shop attendant, who was present at the time, luckily didn't suffer any injuries and was able to provide investigators with the little information that he had, including the fact that the robbers were armed with sharpened blades. He also stated that the car, a Toyota sedan, smashed into the store before the robbers got out and helped themselves to cash and cigarettes. They then got back into the car and managed to flee with their ill-gotten gains. Investigators checked the store's CCTV security cameras and found that the entire incident had been successfully recorded. In the footage, the car can be seen sitting in the middle of the store with shelves and products lying around in disarray after being knocked over, and the two men then emerge from the vehicle to steal whatever they can get their hands on. The first man climbs over what looks like an ice cream fridge before making his way onto the counter, while the second man joins him a few seconds later, and he can be seen pushing several products out of the way to make room on the counter before he also climbs on. They then jump down on the other side of the counter, and the first man makes his way to the right of the screen, while the second robber starts yanking at the cash register drawer. He manages to pull it free and drops it onto the counter, spilling coins as he does so. While he runs over to the second register, his friend grabs the first drawer and climbs back over the counter and the ice cream fridge before getting back in the car with his loot in hand. The second man eventually also finishes what he was doing and makes his way back to the driver's side of the car before getting in with the second drawer in his arms. He then starts the engine, puts the car into gear and drives away, leaving the store in disarray. The CCTV footage has been made available to the public, and investigators have asked for assistance in identifying the two men who weren't known to the cashier on duty during the robbery. The amount of cash that was stolen has not been made public, but it's known that the two culprits also helped themselves to products from the store, including an undisclosed amount of cigarettes before making their getaway. Thanks to the CCTV footage, though, investigators were able to release a description of the two men. The first is described as having a large build and wearing a yellow and blue jacket, along with dark-colored pants, a hat, and black shoes. The second man also had a large build and was seen wearing a dark-colored jacket with red tracksuit pants and black shoes. It also isn't known whether they live in the area, but this is unlikely, as robbers usually target houses and businesses away from their own, since it makes it less likely that they'll be easily recognized. At present, the two culprits remain on the run, and investigators have asked people who live in the area to check their home CCTV systems, as well as their dash cams, in case they inadvertently captured footage of the two men, while either they were trying to flee or when they traveled to the gas station to carry out the crime. Investigators have revealed that they believe this ram raid is connected to another robbery that took place at 11:35 p.m. on the 6th of November on the Great Western Highway, also in Kelso. In this incident, a man, also armed with a sharpened blade, entered a licensed premises before threatening the cashier and demanding that they hand over whatever cash they had. Luckily, the cashier at this store also escaped without injury and was able to provide a description of the robber. He stated that the man seemed to be Aboriginal, or a Torres Strait Islander, and unlike the two ram raid robbers, had a slim build and stood around 5 foot 9 inches tall. He was also able to describe the robber's clothing, reporting that he was wearing a black hooded jumper and a black hat, black latex gloves, black pants, black shoes, and a black face mask. He was also carrying a shoulder bag. If you know either of the two robbers in this footage, or have any information on where they can be found, you're asked to contact Crime Stoppers at 1-800-333-000. Alternatively, you can submit a tip online by going to nsw.crimestoppers.com.au. Robbers usually try to find the easiest possible target before carrying out a robbery, and very often this presents itself in the form of an opportunistic crime, such as a car that's been left unlocked, a house with windows left open, an unattended cash register, or a handbag that's left unattended on a bus seat, for example. In other, more serious cases, the robberies are well planned months in advance in order for the crime to be carried out as swiftly and efficiently as possible to avoid being caught in the act or as they attempt to make their getaway. They also plan their outfits in advance, since it would be careless to wear the same clothes that they're seen in on a daily basis, as they would be easily recognized if CCTV footage of the incident were to be released to the public. But investigators are always hopeful that someone will recognize one of the culprits, since this usually leads to everyone involved in the robbery eventually being identified and tracked down, so that they can face the consequences of their actions. It's with these same hopes in mind that police in Western New South Wales, Australia, have released CCTV security footage of two men who robbed a hotel on Cessnock Road, as they remain on the run more than a year after the crime was committed. In the footage, which dates from the 30th of September 2022, two men can be seen sitting at a bar counter in the hotel, which is located in Hunter Valley, along with the hotel's bartender. At 2:33 p.m., according to the security footage timestamp, two men suddenly burst through the bar's entrance doors and ran around the side of the bar to where the two men were sitting. The men would later report to investigators that the robbers were armed with long, sharpened blades, which they used to intimidate the bartender and the two patrons who were present. They also reported that they couldn't see the robbers' faces, since they were covered with face masks. The robbers can then be seen making their way behind the bar counter and grabbing whatever they can get their hands on. They seem frenzied during the crime, but move quickly as they're clearly anxious to get the job over with so that they can flee. The bartender can be seen talking to the robbers while still trapped behind the counter, but she manages to make her way past one of the thieves, who then follows her out of the bar area. In the meantime, the second robber has opened a white bag and can be seen taking cash from the register, which he then stuffs inside, dropping some of the money as he does so. The first man then jumps over the counter near the camera and seems to wait on his accomplice, who then runs back into view as he enters the bar area once more, with two more cash registers in his hands, which he then passes to his friend. He then joins his accomplice as he jumps over the counter, and comically, the first man attempts to open the wrong door before making his way to the correct one, and both men manage to get away before the police can be notified. The bartender can be seen standing helplessly in the background while the men make their getaway, and one of the patrons, a 48-year-old man who was sitting at the bar, would later report that he had an altercation with one of the robbers, which led him to being treated at a hospital, but he made a full recovery. The police were called as soon as the two robbers left the hotel, but they've not been tracked down, and investigators are hopeful that a member of the public will be able to positively identify one of the men, so that the case can finally be brought to a close. Witnesses reported that the robbers fled on foot on Station Street, but investigators have identified a vehicle of interest and have released a photo of a small dark-colored car, likely a hatchback. The only description given of the two culprits was that they were wearing dark-colored clothing and that they were both of a slim build. In the footage, both men are seemingly wearing hooded sweatshirts, and while one is wearing gray gloves, the other has what looks like red and blue gloves on his hands. Since no one has come forward with information, it isn't known if the robbers live in the area, but locals have been asked to keep a lookout for the black vehicle since it was seen driving in the area after the crime was committed. If you have any information on this robbery, or if you think you might recognize one or both of the robbers, you're urged to contact Strike Force Rubus investigators by dialing Crime Stoppers at 1-800-333-000. You can choose to remain anonymous and also submit a tip online at nsw.crimestoppers.com.au. Some missing person cases are truly baffling, as the missing person is seen on clear CCTV footage mere moments before they disappear, but they're never seen or heard from again, leaving everyone involved with many unanswered questions. When this happens, there aren't many options available to investigators, and the only course of action left to take is to release the CCTV footage in hopes that someone will come forward with more information, and to search the areas where that person was last seen. North Yorkshire Police in England have released two separate pieces of CCTV footage in a bid to track down a missing woman, 20-year-old Annie Dryden, who lives in Middlesbrough, and who's been missing since the 4th of January 2014. They've become increasingly concerned for her well-being, since it isn't known whether she headed into a hamlet known as Battersby, or whether she decided to go camping to the North York Moors, which is said to have had rough terrain that can be difficult to navigate. In the CCTV footage, Annie can be seen walking along a platform at James Cook train station, and it's believed that she then caught the 2:09 p.m. train to Whitby, though the train makes a few stops along the way. And in the second piece of footage, she can be seen getting off the train at Battersby at 2:38 p.m., and she's never seen again after that. After Annie was reported missing, a search was quickly organized with the help of mountain rescue teams and police helicopter personnel. The first area that was searched is located close to this train station, as it's believed she may have gone camping in the area. But she may have decided to go camping in one of the other rural areas that can be found in North Yorkshire, and hence, investigators have asked that hikers and cyclists in those areas keep their eyes peeled in case they spot Annie. They've also asked that anyone who does see her report it to the police immediately so that she can be tracked down and confirmed as safe. Searchers have traveled from house to house, providing residents with a description of Annie and asking if they've seen her since she got off the train on the 4th of January. They've also urged people in the Battersby and Ingleby Greenhow areas to check their sheds and outbuildings, since she may have taken shelter in one of these at some point. The investigation was initially being led by Cleveland police officers, but has since been turned over to the North Yorkshire Police, after it was found that Annie traveled to Battersby and that she will likely be staying in that general area. No sign of Annie was found during the initial search, and so another was conducted of the same areas, but this time with the aid of 26 Cleveland Mountain Rescue Team volunteers, as well as helicopters and other volunteers. Investigators would later receive a report that Annie had made a post to one of her social media accounts, in which she stated that she was considering moving to a squad, an informal settlement in London. But this has neither been confirmed nor proven to be false, and hence it remains a possibility. Investigators have also made an appeal to anyone who knows Annie to come forward, as they might have information on the areas that she's known to frequent, or may know what her plans were before she traveled to Battersby. It should be noted that in both sets of CCTV footage, Annie doesn't seem distressed in any way, and she's seen alone, both before getting on the train and when she's seen getting off at Battersby. An appeal has been issued to anyone who was on the same train as Annie at the time that she was seen in the CCTV footage, as they may have information, no matter how inconsequential, that could help establish her current whereabouts. They've also asked anyone who saw Annie getting off the train to come forward, as they may have seen which direction she walked in after arriving at her stop. Annie is described as being of a slim build and standing about 5 foot 10 inches tall. She has a very distinctive hairstyle, since she has dark hair with blonde fringe, which isn't very common. She can also be recognized by a scar above her top lip. The last time that she was seen, Annie was known to be carrying a black and green backpack, and in the footage, she's wearing a beige hat with headphones, a dark-colored jacket, and gray pants. If you've spotted Annie or have any information on where she might be, you're asked to dial the emergency number 101, quoting reference number 002768. In December of 1998, one of the biggest heists in Scottish history took place. Almost 15 years on, the crime remains unsolved, and police have few clues that could lead to any answers. The crime took place at the Securities Depot in Aberdeen. At the time, Securities was one of the biggest cash handling companies in the UK. Its armored vans were a familiar sight on British streets, carrying money to and from banks and ATMs, with various depots around the country. The depot at Altons in Aberdeen was fairly inconspicuous. It was located on an industrial estate, and from the outside it blended in with its neighbors. The only signs that there was anything special about this particular company were the bollards placed outside to prevent a ramming attack, and the large number of CCTV cameras. Inside, the depot had a state-of-the-art security technology, including alarms that detected changes in temperature and movement. These were connected directly to the local police. There were also bars on the windows, a reinforced front door, and manual panic alarms. In late November or early December, one of the automatic alarms was set off. Police arrived shortly after and did a sweep of the building, but didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. A few days later, they would be back under very different circumstances. It was the early evening on December 3rd. Staff at the engineering company that occupied a neighboring building were getting ready to leave for the night. If they'd been looking outside, they would have seen one of the Securities vans go into the building through the electronic roller doors, but none reported seeing or hearing anything out of the ordinary. In the Securities Depot, staff were just beginning to unload money from the van when 4 men grappled down from the ceiling. The men were dressed in all black. Only one of them spoke, but they all threatened staff with weapons. According to later reports, one staff member managed to lock himself in the control room, only to be forced out when his coworkers were threatened. Stories at the time reported someone managing to press the panic button, but nobody was able to stop the men though. Moments later, 2 more men joined the group, both driving white vehicles. The money was loaded into the vehicles, having to be dragged across the floor due to the weight. In less than 15 minutes, £1.3 million worth of notes were loaded into the car and van that the thieves had brought with them. They were then driven off into the night. There was still plenty of money left behind, but the thieves were well disciplined. They seemed to know exactly how much time they had before the police arrived, and didn't stay too long. They were gone by the time the police got there. There were clues as to who these men were and where they had gone. It was determined the vehicles were both stolen 2 weeks earlier and were later found 7 miles away, completely destroyed. Despite featuring on Crime Watch a £250,000 reward and CCTV showing one of the men being dropped off at an Asda car park, no information about the culprits has ever been found, and the crime remains unsolved. In July of 2023, the unsolved case of Daniel Morgan made headlines again. A series of bungled police investigations and corruption had stopped the person responsible for taking his life from being caught for more than 35 years. Morgan was a private investigator and partner at the firm Southern Investigations. The company mostly dealt with divorces, recovery of hire purchase goods, and serving court orders. It didn't seem to be the kind of company that would be at the center of anything shocking. On March 10th, Morgan and his Southern Investigations partner, Jonathan Riess, met for a drink at the Golden Lion pub in London. At 9 p.m., Riess left to go meet another friend at a different pub 3 miles away, and not long after, Morgan also left. At 9:40 p.m., his body was found in the parking lot behind the pub by a BBC sound producer. He'd been attacked with a bladed object and had already passed away by the time his body was found. His watch had been stolen, as had notes that he'd been seen riding in and the pub. However, it was very clear this wasn't a robbery gone wrong. £1,000 in banknotes were left on his person, and it would have been taken if the motive was robbery. It seemed obvious early in the investigation that the attack was premeditated, but who could have done this and why wasn't very clear. Morgan's work gathered attention, and many people believe it may have been the motive for the attack. But it may not have been any of the people Morgan was investigating who were behind the crime. Riess became a prime suspect early on. He had been at the pub 3 miles away, half an hour after leaving Morgan. But if he had driven that distance, he would easily have had enough time to commit the attack. Possible motives for Riess committing the attack included everything from Morgan allegedly being a womanizer, to Morgan being upset at Riess for using moonlighting police officers. In 2006, Riess and 3 associates were charged with taking Morgan's life, and another with trying to pervert the course of justice. But the case against them collapsed, possibly due to a lack of evidence. Riess and his co-accused would later file a lawsuit against the Metropolitan Police and be awarded £439,000 in damages. Morgan's family believed that police corruption had hindered the investigation, and key clues that could have solved the case had been missed. In July of 2023, the police commissioner admitted the police had prioritized their own reputation over solving the crime, and a settlement was awarded to Morgan's family. The finding served as some justice for Morgan's family, but they're no closer to finding out who took the life of their loved one or why. In 2022, the police released CCTV images connected to a strange crime that had occurred 5 months earlier. The case involved the theft of more than $1 million worth of silver and remains unsolved. What makes this case so strange is that we don't know when or even where exactly it happened. On the afternoon of November 26, 2021, an inconspicuous truck left a depot in Sydney, Australia, destined for Melbourne. It wasn't an armored truck or any kind of vehicle specifically made for transporting expensive cargo. It was a basic Kenworth truck with a Kruger trailer, something that would blend in with all the other trucks making the trip south. Inside the trailer were 192 silver bars, weighing a total of 960 kilograms. The bars were wrapped in simple black plastic and labeled as engineering parts. According to the company that owned the precious metals, this was common practice for trying to deter thieves. It was also apparently common practice to transport silver in this way, a practice that would have saved the company roughly $49,000 if all had gone to plan. The journey from Sydney to Melbourne took the entire weekend, despite the journey between the two cities typically taking less than 10 hours. When the truck arrived in Melbourne at 8 a.m. on Monday the 29th, its precious cargo was missing. Apparently, the driver hadn't realized the theft had taken place until they arrived at the destination. They couldn't even give police a rough idea when the crime might have taken place. That meant police were looking over a stretch of more than 500 miles over 3.5 days for silver. The possibility that this was an inside job was raised. In theory, only those involved in the transportation would have known about the silver. But if any evidence was found to prove that it was an inside job, it was never made public. In March of 2022, the police issued another appeal for information. This appeal featured CCTV footage of a dark-colored Toyota Land Cruiser Ute seen in Picton shortly after midnight on Sunday, November 28th. The CCTV didn't appear to show anything suspicious about the vehicle. The police didn't reveal why the car was considered a vehicle of interest. Since then, there have been no further updates on the case, and it's assumed the case remains unsolved. Anyone with information on the case can contact Crime Stoppers at 1-800-333-000. On the morning of February 4th, 2003, a resident in Flintshire, Wales, found the local postman unconscious and beaten in front of his house. Paul Savage had been attacked in a swift and silent crime. Hours later, he passed away in the hospital. Paul was a relatively well-liked member of the small community where he lived. He and his family had moved to North Wales the previous summer and had joined the Royal Mail not long after. Nobody knew of anybody who had any problems with him, and there were no signs that anything strange or unusual would happen to him. The morning he was attacked, Paul had left the local post office at 5:50 a.m. He was about halfway through his round when he came to Clayton Road. He got off his bike and started delivering mail on the residential street. At around 7:15 a.m., an unknown individual or individuals attacked Paul. He was struck by at least one blunt object, but it's possible more than one weapon was used in the attack. When he lost consciousness, the attackers fled, leaving Paul behind on the snow-covered ground. Nobody saw or heard anything. Even the resident of the house where Paul was found only realized anything had happened when he left for work shortly after. The only possible clue was two young men in hoodies seen near Paul's bike around the time that he was attacked. They headed towards the town center but were never identified. Whether they actually had anything to do with the attack is still unknown. At first, the crime caused panic. It was believed that Paul had been the victim of a robbery gone wrong or some other unprovoked attack. He had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Soon, the police realized that Paul may have actually been targeted. Before he moved to Wales, he had a lengthy criminal history. He had just finished serving a 9-month prison sentence for intent to distribute illegal substances. Even though there was no evidence he'd been involved in anything illegal after his release, the police believed his history might have had something to do with the attack. During the investigation, they found a criminal network in the area where he had moved to. Several people were arrested for crimes linked to illegal substances, but there were no clues that could explain what happened to Paul. A number of appeals for information have been made, and the crime featured on BBC's Crime Watch roadshow. There's a $20,000 reward for information in the case, and anyone with information can contact Crime Stoppers at 0800-555-111. In September of 1972, a group of thieves fled the Montreal Museum of Fine Art with a hoard of paintings and small artifacts, worth at least $2 million. Since then, there have been no clues as to who was behind the theft and where any of the artwork is today. The robbery began not long after midnight on September 4th. The group of 3 men climbed onto the roof and gained access to the museum through an unalarmed skylight. It was only the skylight that was left unalarmed due to renovation work that was happening at the time. After lowering themselves into the building, the men wandered around for roughly half an hour before being discovered by a security guard. They were carrying weapons though, and the guards on duty were quickly rounded up and locked in an office in one of the lower floors. For the next 2 hours, the men had the museum to themselves. They tried to get a pulley system together to lift the paintings out through the skylight, but when that didn't work, they decided to instead use one of the museum vans. Dozens of paintings had been carefully selected and removed from their frames. At about 3 a.m., one of the criminals opened a side door, possibly to access the van. That triggered an alarm. 18 of the smaller paintings were piled together and the thieves fled on foot, never to be seen again. The police and museum staff arrived not long after the alarm was triggered, but the thieves were already long gone. The theft got some attention in the US and Canada, but that only seemed to make matters worse for the museum. An art expert saw photos of the paintings that had been stolen and informed the museum that many were not painted by the masters that the museum claimed. It was later revealed that the museum had been suspicious about a few of the artworks but didn't want to make that information public. Only 2 pieces of art were ever recovered, when the thieves tried to ransom the artwork and released a necklace and painting in a show of good faith. The others would never be released and no money was handed over. There have been a few leads over the years, and none that have led to any arrests. Police believed it may have been an inside job, but the fact an alarm was tripped seems to point against that. Students at a local art school were also inspected due to tension between them and the museum staff, but there was no evidence that they had been involved. It's likely that all the paintings are now in private collections if they survived, but there is hope that their owners may one day come forward. If I were to ask you what this photo depicts, you would, in all likelihood, think that it's just an old-timey photo of an older lady, and although she has a less than friendly expression on her face, it would be hard to imagine that she's anything but pleasant. That is, until you hear her backstory. This photo is of a woman called Louise Monnier de Marconnet, who in 1901 lived in Paris, France. Although her husband had passed away by that stage, she was still considered to be a respected member of the community. But that all changed when an anonymous letter revealed her true nature and the events that had been going on behind the family's closed doors. In the letter, the sender claimed that someone was being held against her will at the de Marconnet household. It was well known that Louise had a daughter named Blanche, but no one had seen her for over 2 decades after she fell in love with a lawyer. But it would turn out that Louise didn't approve of their relationship, as she felt that the lawyer wasn't good enough for her daughter. When Blanche refused to stop seeing him, her mother took drastic steps. To stop Blanche from seeing the man, Louise locked her in one of the rooms of their house and would not allow her to leave, but still, Blanche declared her love for the lawyer. This would go on for the next 25 years until the anonymous letter exposed the truth. When police arrived at the house to investigate, they found Blanche living in horrible conditions, and she was immediately taken to the hospital. Louise would pass away before she could stand trial, and although her brother, Marcel, was convicted for his part in Blanche's ordeal, he was later acquitted. Blanche would eventually be transferred to a psychiatric hospital, where she stayed until she passed away in 1913. We're used to seeing mannequins on a daily basis inside of shops or in their storefront windows, where they display the clothing that's for sale in that shop. Nonetheless, they can still be a little creepy sometimes, especially when they're found in unexpected places. This photo looks like any other storefront window, with a male and female mannequin donning evening attire, the latter lounging on an orange couch. But take a look at the sign that's hidden behind the couch, and we can see parts of the words nuclear materials. In truth, these mannequins weren't in any store window, but instead made up part of a makeshift town called Doomtown in Nevada. From 1952 to 1955, these towns were constructed and fitted with mannequins by the US government while they were conducting tests, codenamed Annie, on how atomic explosions would impact the typical American household. The town was made up of several houses, all containing mannequins, and even had the everyday buildings that we encounter today, such as gas stations and other stores. Behind each of these houses, a bunker was built, and since the houses were different distances from the blast, authorities could establish which bunkers were the most effective in case of a nuclear attack. But they weren't just placed inside the homes. Some mannequins were left outside to simulate a normal day with people out and about in the streets of the strange town. Some mannequins were dressed in wool clothing, others in cotton and so forth, to determine the effects that a nuclear blast would have on different materials. Since the houses were placed at different distances from the blast, the military could determine the damage that each house would sustain during a blast. On one occasion, it was found that the town's electricity supply had been damaged, but certain services were still up and running, such as telephones. The mannequins, however, fared far worse as they were severely damaged by the explosions, painting a grim picture for the prospect of such a horrible event ever happening. As depressing and creepy as this may sound, the information that was gathered during the Annie tests may prove invaluable in the future, if only to help us decide on which bunker to hide in. The Monte Cristo homestead, which is situated in New South Wales, Australia, is known to be the country's most haunted house, and many people have claimed to have strange, supernatural experiences in the building, on occasion even managing to capture spirits on camera. The house is an old one, built in 1885 by Christopher William Crawley, an entrepreneur who passed away in 1910. His wife, Elizabeth, took his passing very hard, and she rarely left the house, only venturing out twice before she herself passed in 1933. The house stood empty until 1963, when a couple, Reg and Olive Ryan, decided to buy it, not knowing that the house had a reputation for being rather creepy. But they took the hauntings in stride, and eventually decided to open the house to the public as a haunted attraction. It's during one of these tours that a photo was taken by a visitor that's left many people completely baffled. The guest decided to photograph one of the smaller bedrooms that contains only a single bed and 2 wooden cabinets. But when the photo was developed, they noticed something that surely shouldn't be there. In the doorway to the left, a translucent figure of a woman can be seen. She has long hair, pale skin, and is wearing a white dress, and it almost seems as though she's looking directly into the camera. This is probably the best example of a ghost being captured on camera in the Monte Cristo homestead, but there are many more that also contain strange apparitions. Some people speculate that in another photo, A woman who worked for the Crawleys can be seen reflected in a mirror. Another, taken outside at horse-drawn carriages, shows a man believed to be Mr. Crawley sitting on one of the carriages as if he's getting ready to head out. Some guests have also reported hearing a woman crying, and it's believed to be Mrs. Crawley, who's still mourning the loss of her husband. Other ghostly encounters inside the home include the sound of disembodied footsteps, strange lights that suddenly disappear when they're investigated, and eerie noises that no one is able to explain. Sprag Mansion, a reportedly haunted building located in Cranston, Rhode Island, was originally built as a farmhouse by William Sprag in 1790. But after he passed away, the house was left to his son, Amasa, who transformed it into the impressive 28-room mansion that it is today. Unfortunately, Amasa lost his life shortly after, and his brother William then took over and did his best to keep the family's printworks business alive. But he was unable to do so. The mansion was eventually sold to the Cranston Historical Society in 1967. But unbeknownst to them, the house is known to be haunted. Since around 1925, people have reported strange experiences and sightings in the house. For example, this photo taken by Cyril Palace, which shows a strange orb that was captured on camera in the house's wine cellar. The first recorded paranormal encounter happened on the house's main staircase, when witnesses saw an apparition of a man walking down the stairs. And many people believe that this is Amasa, that's still looking after the building. One of the first instances of a strange event in the house occurred in a room called the Doll's Room that has since been torn down. In here, the family kept a collection of dolls and marionettes, which have been seen with their eyes moving, despite the fact that they're painted on. Other visitors to the house have reported feeling someone brush against them when there's no one with them, and this is often accompanied by a rush of ice-cold air. There have also been reports of white figures that haunt the halls, and faces that are seen in the mirrors that hang on the walls. On another occasion, two men decided to use a Ouija board to see if they could contact a spirit in the house, and they were shocked when the board spelled out the words, "Tell my story." Another regular sighting in the creepy mansion is of a woman who was seen in the highest domed section of the building. Passers-by have reported that she stares at them as they walk by, or that she walks back and forth as if she's impatiently waiting for someone. As if this isn't creepy enough, there have also been reports that guests had their bedding ripped off their beds while they slept, only to find that there's no one else in the room with them. In 2002, a man named Samuel Sherman was browsing on eBay when he came across a stereoscopic image that someone had taken long ago at Mount Washington. He was instantly intrigued by it and decided to buy it, paying a total of $385. What had piqued his interest in the photo was an object that can be seen floating in the clouds above the mountain, and when he had the image cropped, he realized that it seemed to be cigar-shaped, and he realized that he may be in possession of a very old photo of a UFO. The photo was soon uploaded to the internet, where it was shared far and wide by UFO enthusiasts, who believed that this was an extraterrestrial craft that had been caught on camera. But one man decided to investigate further, and for the next 6 years, he tried to find as much information on the photo as possible. Then, in 2003, he stumbled upon an old Wires Time article that held a few more clues. The article stated that the photo was taken by two men named Howard Kimball and Amos Clough. Since the photo was taken in 1870 or 71, it was quickly named by ufologists as the oldest known photo of a UFO ever taken. He then learned that a high-resolution copy of the image was kept at the New York Public Library, and after inspecting it, he stated that the object was, in fact, not a UFO, but an object that had been placed on the mountain, since it could be seen in front of the mountain in the original image rather than floating above it. But others weren't convinced as theories started cropping up. Some commenters stated that they believe it was a mothership of sorts, and that smaller extraterrestrial craft may have been stored inside, ready for deployment. There were also some people who claimed that they could see an emblem on the object that closely resembled the emblem worn by German soldiers during World War II. To further their theories, believers pointed out that since it's a stereoscopic image, it would be virtually impossible to fake, since those types of photos are known to be very hard to falsify. Sherman stated that he intended to have the photo analyzed by experts, after which he would have the results made public, but whether this was ever done is unknown. Whether this photo really does show an extraterrestrial craft hovering over Mount Washington or not, it's an image that has sparked a lot of debate and is sure to do so for decades to come.